back, listeners, to Mind Over Matter, the podcast where we explore the deeper dimensions of the human mind, consciousness, and the nature of reality as well. I'm your host, Sana, and today in this episode, we are diving into something really very interesting. We are diving into transcendental psychology. What exactly it is? It's how our consciousness shapes the reality we experience and how mindfulness can be a tool to break free from the limitations of the ego. Now, to help me with this conversation, our guest today is Alan Carroll. Let me share a bit about Alan with all of you. Alan is an educational psychologist and the founder of Alan Carroll and Associates. Alan has spent decades exploring mindfulness, the power of the pause, and how these tools can not only transform the way we communicate, but also reduce the psychological suffering that stems from our attachment to the ego. We'll explore here what it means to transcend our habitual patterns of thought and access a deeper, more expansive awareness, one where fear dissolves and presence, awareness takes the center stage. Interesting, right, sir? Listeners, let's quickly dive into this conversation. Alan, welcome to the show, and it's an absolute pleasure having you with us.
Well, thank you very much, Sana, and blessings to you and your audience. And what a wonderful way of summarizing what the transcendental psychology and the exploration into that space is. Wonderful. It's very good.
Lovely. Thank you so much for your kind words, Alan. And to begin with, talking about your life, you have dedicated your life to mindfulness and, in fact, the art of public speaking. So, if you can explain how our attachment to the ego, how does it create that psychological suffering in communication?
In transcendental psychology, a way of describing it is that using a computer analogy,
Mhm,
you have two operating systems that you can choose from in life. You can choose from the egoic operating system, or you can
mhm,
choose from the spiritual operating system. And you can choose either one you want. And if you choose the ego, which probably 99% of human beings choose, then you live your life under the grace of the ego, under the grace of the things that you've identified yourself to be. And when
mhm,
you add up all the things that you identify yourself to be, you would term Eckhart Tolle uses the word conceptual identity.
mhm,
What is the concepts that you use to describe yourself? I'm your body, I'm a country, these are my thoughts, these are my opinions. All these
mhm,
are concepts that people use to describe themselves. And concepts are thoughts. And in that operating system, you are the victim of the thoughts that you think. You're not able to manage the thoughts that you think. But in the spiritual reality, in the spiritual operating system, you transcend the thoughts. When you transcend the thought, you transcend your identity, you transcend your ego. So the question, the challenge is, how do you decide to choose which operating system you want to use? One leads to suffering, that's the
mhm.
ego, and one leads to mukti, one leads to divine light, and that's the spiritual. So transcendental psychology is the study of that movement from the egoic suffering reality to the release of the divine reality of the spiritual operating system. And that's what I've been doing in my life, studying that and working with it and teaching it.
Lovely. That is so inspiring, Alan. And how do you believe? Because I understand, it is so right now important in today's social context. Where ego is kind of taking the center stage, whether it's digitally or personally, in fact, professionally as well. How important it is in today's context.
To be able to manage your ego means to be able to manage your thoughts. How many thoughts do you think a day? People have been talking about the number of thoughts you hear. Deepak Chopra, you hear Eckhart Tolle, you hear various people talk about 65 to 80,000 thoughts pass through your consciousness a day. You want to get to the place in consciousness where you realize that you're not the thoughts. You're not the thoughts that you think. Well, if you're not the thoughts, if you could erase all the thoughts that you think, what would be left? Well, you'd be left in a dream world in which there are no thoughts. And if there's a dream world which are no thoughts, what would you label that dream world in which there are no thoughts? You would label it as empty. You would label it as the akash. You would label it as space. You would label it as the quintessence. You would label it as nothingness. These are terms that are used. And so the challenge, the job of your spiritual journey is to be able to reach a state of neutrality in which you no longer are the victim of the thoughts that you think. You are the blessings of the empty spaces between the thoughts that you think. And so you begin to create empty spaces in your life. You create space in your life, and space, sana, is in the Greeks is the fifth element: earth, air,
Mhm.
fire, water, and space. So you want to be a student of space.
Interesting, interesting. And talking about consciousness, if it's more than just brain activity, Alan, how do we scientifically validate its existence beyond the body?
The challenge that you have with the study of space is that you can't touch space, you can't see space, you can't feel space, you can't smell space, you can't hear space. Space is empty. But you can create space. And when you create space, then you have the validation of the benefit that comes from the creation of space. And you said that earlier I told you that I've been to Bangalore many times for Cisco Systems. I've been training public speakers for 40 years. And
Mhm,
after training public speakers for 40 years, thousands of them all around the world, it turns out
mhm,
that the only thing that separates an amateur speaker from a professional speaker is
mhm,
that a professional speaker utilizes the empty spaces between the sounds that they speak. And the spiritual journey often is talked about as meditation.
mhm,
Meditation is the ability to manage the thoughts that you think. Well, how do you manage the thoughts that you think? Well, you begin to train yourself to be able to erase consciously the thoughts that you think. And so you get to that place where you have a blank slate, a tabula rasa, an empty space in your consciousness when you meditate. And that gives you a portal to that divine essence in everybody. And the same is with speaking. I'll demonstrate for your audience. Right now, I'm speaking at a rate of about 150 words per minute. I can slow down the amount of words that I speak per minute to perhaps 75 words per minute. So what I'm doing is I am removing the sounds, the number of sounds that I speak per minute, and I'm inserting empty spaces. Every time I consciously, when I'm speaking to you, Sana,
mhm,
insert an empty space, a pause, I become more enlightened. I become more divine. I become more spacious. I knock on the door of my spiritual self, and the door will open up, and you free yourself from the ego. And that is a wonderful, wonderful gift, and it's available to everybody. Children, adults, practice mindful, spacious speaking, a minute a
mhm.
day, and that will begin to accelerate your journey into that spiritual realm of mindfulness.
Wow, wow. And by the way, for our listeners, tabula rasa is basically an empty slate. It's kind of the idea of individuals being born empty of any built-in mental content. It's just for information, I thought. because this word I heard in an interview a few months back, and I was it was kind of a really new thing for me. I never have even heard about it, so I just wanted to share with my listeners as well. Um, anyway, Alan, as you mentioned, you have trained thousands of speakers across the world as well. Um, Many people struggle with anxiety when speaking in front of others, sweaty hands, palms, and butterflies in stomach, increased heart rate. I have gone through that. How does transcending the ego help us overcome this fear and speak with more clarity and presence, utilizing the space as you mentioned?
Absolutely. Wonderful question. I can look at my own experience. My
Mhm,
first time doing public speaking
mhm,
in my early 20s, standing up in front of an audience, terrifying. Because people would, it's like you have this costume that you wear, and when you stand up in front of the audience, the costume disappears, and you're afraid that people are going to see what's underneath the costume. And what's
exactly.
underneath the costume is a little scared, a little scared little kid inside that's shaking and nervous and all that. And so the ego says, no, no, I don't want to play that game. I'm not going to raise my hand. I'm not going to stand up. I'm not going to do public speaking. So the majority of people never go through that space. Fortunately, I got to go through that space and discover what's on the other side. And what's on the other side of the terror is a release, is freedom. And when you practice, which you need to practice, uh, the way I would recommend that people practice in order to reduce that suffering of the rejection of they won't like me, I'll make a mistake, I'll look like a fool, is to by yourself in front of a mirror, relax, close the door, no one's around, make eye contact with yourself, take any words that you want to speak, and begin to keep your body relaxed and say a few words, and then stop, take a breath, and notice any tension in your body. Relax the tension, get the tension back. Okay, I want to relax. Your body becomes still again. Take the breath, then say a few more words, say a couple more words, and begin to practice the pausing, practice the creating the empty spaces. And every time, what you'll notice is that every time, right now, speaking with you,
Mhm.
when I stop, I'm able to take a breath, and a wave of relaxation goes through my body from the top of my head to my feet and out through Mother Earth. And what you'll notice is that the amateur speakers, the nervous speakers, the ones that are concerned about speaking, there's no space at all, no pause at all between the sounds that they speak, which creates tension. But every time you pause, it creates relaxation. And if you can create the relaxation, the reduction of tension, then the quality of your speaking, which I'll label the the ability to articulate your thoughts. The ability, Sana, to be able to articulate your thoughts is comprised of three components. If I can practice spacious speaking, pausing when I'm speaking, you'll notice that the clarity of the sounds, the clarity of the thought forms that I'm delivering to you right now are clear. You'll also notice that if you can pause, not only will the thought forms be clearer, they'll be more understandable. So
Right.
clarity, understandable are two components of articulation, which are benefits of the mindful spacious speaking. And the third benefit, which is my favorite benefit, is the ability to uh, the fluidity, the flow of the thoughts. And when something flows, it becomes more relaxed. It becomes like a river flowing down, water flowing down the river. And the spaces that you create, the pauses that you create, allow a flow to occur. And boy, when you got a flow and clarity and articulation and understanding all coming together, it's a dream. It's wonderful.
Sounds ethereal, and that's really really, I think, a really good takeaway for our listeners who are looking forward to hone their public speaking skills with leveraging mindfulness. Also, Alan, when we talk about transcending the ego, some psychologists would believe that a strong ego is also important for confidence and personal development. Is it possible that dissolving the ego could actually be counterproductive?
The ego is not a bad thing. The ego is not something that is dangerous or bad or terrible that you need to beat up and get rid of. It's a useful tool. The ego is comprised of your thoughts. The thoughts about I'm going to stop at a red light in Bangalore rather than go through the red light. That's a thought inside your head. Uh, so the ego's not a bad thing. The challenge of it is you need to be able to manage it. You need to be able to manage your thoughts, the thoughts that you think. The thoughts that you think paint the reality in which you live. What I think inside my head is then projected out onto the big movie of my life in the outer world. And so if I think that Sana is a wonderful person, if I think India is a wonderful country, if I think that the spiritual evolution of the Hindu consciousness is just fabulous, then I live in that dream in which you're a wonderful person, India is a wonderful country, and the
Mhm,
spiritual evolution of Hinduism is a wonderful thing. That's the dream, that's the world I live in. But if I think the opposite, if I think
mhm,
the negative of that, and then I suffer. And so people are a victim of the thoughts that they think. So you want to be able to get control of the thoughts that you think. And when you get control of the thoughts that you think, you get control of the ego. And so the ego, rather than being the what's the word I want? Rather than the ego to determine what your life is going to be, you're able to say, you know what, that thought that I'm thinking is not very beneficial to my mental health, to my physical health, to my spiritual health, to my emotional health. So I want to look at, well, what thoughts would be more appropriate? What thoughts would be better for my personal growth and development? Well, thoughts of love would certainly be thoughts that I want to increase my statistic of loving thoughts and reduce my judgmental thoughts of negative thoughts. Negative thoughts a lot come from the ego. You don't get negative thoughts from your spiritual self. You get thoughts of love and kindness, compassion, forgiveness from your spiritual self. So the spiritual self is the operating system that you want to choose. The problem that you have, Sana, with choosing that system, you have to let go of the egoic operating system. You have to, and the basic fundamental issue in the egoic operating system is that the ego judges the dream. The ego judges the reality in which you live. And people constantly judge what's happening in the moment that they live in. So right now, the listeners are judging what you're saying. They're judging what I'm saying. They're comparing it to what they know. Oh, Alan doesn't know anything, or Alan knows a lot, or Son is this, Alan's this. So you're constantly judging. And you want to get to the point, I'll use the word neutrality, in which you no longer get to judge the dream. You no longer get to judge. So now you are neutral in the dream. And you let the spiritual part of you now judge the dream. You let the divine part of you judge the dream. And when the divine part of you judges the dream, the divine part uses forgiveness as a way of judging the errors of their brothers and sisters that you see in the egoic world. You see a lot of bad things in the egoic world. You only see light, love, and the divine in the spiritual world. So, boy, I'll choose to practice the operating system of the spiritual rather than the operating system of the ego.
mhm. Makes sense. Makes sense. And when we talk about thoughts, Alan, uh, what I believe, thoughts are also created or they're affected hugely by the external circumstances, right from our childhood. Maybe we have some kind of trauma, bad experiences, then our surrounding, the kind of environment we have grown into, the friends we have, the school we had, the people we interact with, the content we consume, each and every element externally, it does affect our thoughts. So, do you think transcending into the spiritual realm can actually create a cover, or it can shield our thoughts from getting affected by the external elements?
I like you use the word consume. Uh,
Mm.
The the analogy that I use, Sana, is that we're all raised in a garden. You're raised in the Indian garden, and the caretakers are your parents. You ate Indian food. You have Indian friends.
Mm.
You went to places in India. I was raised in the garden of the United States. I had the
Mm.
United States gardener caretakers, my parents, and things happen in the garden. Events happen in the garden. Divorces happen in the garden. Upsets happen in the garden. Trauma happens in the garden. Lots of stuff happens in the garden. Joy happens in the garden. Love happens in the garden. Wonderful pets that you can pet happen in the garden. Lots of things happen in the garden, which in psychology we'll call it is your conditioning, how you have been conditioned based on the garden in which you live, and out of that garden comes the fruit. Well, the fruit is, you can say the fruit is the thoughts that you think from the garden. So, what are the thoughts that you think? And in meditation and in mindfulness, the thoughts that you think, the trauma thoughts, the good thoughts, the bad thoughts, uh, when you practice creating empty spaces, you begin to have a space like between the event that's happening and all the thoughts that are stirred up by the event that are happening. There's now a space, and you develop the part of your psychological mental health, which would be essential in order to handle all the stuff that's happening in the world right now. And that part of your personality, I call it the observer. It's also called the watcher, and the witness. So you are able to look at the event. You're able to take a breath, relax the body, get your body still, get the energy in your body back to from the sympathetic nervous system to the parasympathetic nervous system, where you're going from tension to relaxation. You get your physical body relaxed. And that, if you can get your physical body relaxed, close your eyes, take the deep breaths, get the physical body relaxed until your physical body is relaxed. Then open your eyes and then decide what action I should take in to deal with the event in front of me. But the majority of people aren't able in the moment to stop, pause, take a breath, relax their body, get centered, get balanced, become still, and then engage. And if you don't do that, then you're on automatic. You're not manually controlling the instrument of your body. You're automatically reacting to what's going on in front of you, and that's the journey to hell, because the automatic reactions are unconscious, and lead to suffering. You want your actions to be under your control. And if the actions are under your control, then of course you would do things that are loving, kind forgiveness, because you're not loving, kind forgiveness to the things that are happening outside yourself, because the things that are happening outside yourself are merely a projection of what's going on inside yourself. So when I forgive the thing outside myself, I'm actually forgiving the thing inside myself, and it heals. It heals me physically, it heals me emotionally, mentally, and spiritually.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, because it, definitely, as you said, it's hellish when our emotions dictate our actions. Uh, I think it's a very, very important insight for our listeners, especially in today's context, especially in the digital world. Uh, anyway, Alan, this was such an insightful conversation. I think you have given us a lot in such a short time to think about, to do self introspection, not just in terms of how we communicate, but how we show up in the present moment. So, if our listeners would wish to connect with you and explore more about the wisdom you impart, how they can do that.
Website is ACA mindful you.com. That's the website. You can Google me. I wrote a book called The Broadband Connection: The Art of the IT Presentation. And so that they can read the book. There's a lot of things going on in the book, and I have another book coming out, which will be spiritual communication, which deals with the subject that we're talking about right now.
Okay, perfect. Well, we'll have all the details mentioned in the show notes. And once again, Alan, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and for the work you are doing in helping people break free from psychological suffering of the ego and also in communication. So, thank you so much.
And thank you for inviting me to share my thoughts with your guest. It's been fun. It's been a privilege, and I wish you well, and I wish everybody to be successful on their journey into mindfulness and their spiritual growth and development.
Lovely, lovely. Thank you so much for your kind words once again, Alan. And to all of our listeners, if today's conversation has connected with you, be sure to check out the show notes to connect with Alan through his website and his workshops, his resources. And um, I would like to end this conversation with a note from my end. The power to transform your reality starts with a single pause. Until next time, stay mindful, stay present, and keep exploring the vastness of your own consciousness. Thank you to everyone for listening to the Mind Over Matter. Thank you.